Would you like to know how to heal the inner child through attachment wounds, trauma, and neglect? Well, that's what this video and the next video in the series are going to be about. This is part one. This is all about how we get wounded and what the inner child even is and why you should care. And then part two will be much more about okay, how do we repair those wounds? Very practical stuff in part two, so keep an eye out for that. Hello, my name is Jesse. Welcome to the channel. Open Source Owners, where we talk about what if humans had an owner's manual. When we talk about the inner child, we're talking about attachment. Attachment is the first map that develops in the human brain. So when I say map, I just mean a collection of neural networks that sort of function as a way to navigate the space, the complexity of being a human, in particular related to social relationships. So your attachment to other people is that map. So the map can be mapped accurately or inaccurately, and it really depends on what's happening in that early formative years. As you see here, attachment maps are formed really early, really between 6 months and 2 years of age. You have a permanent attachment model in your brain about how other people are and how you are in relationship to other people. So if you had a poor attachment modeling that developed your map by age 2, well, that's something that you carry with you as an adult, unfortunately. 75% of adults die with the same attachment map that they had when they were 2. So this is a very stable map that can be changed. By the way, it takes about 6 months to 2 years to change this map permanently so that you no longer have an insecure attachment map, but you have a secure attachment map. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about with secure and insecure, let's get into that right now. These are the 4 attachment styles. You can see secure is in white. That's the only form of secure attachment. That is the ideal form of attachment that we want. And if we're doing the healing the inner child sort of work, what we're trying to ultimately do is develop and build a map in our brain that is a secure map and a secure model. And ultimately, if we do that, the secure map will take over, and that will be our attachment style. We will have repaired our attachment style. And again, it takes about 6 months to 2 years of semi-consistent work on it. It's not like you have to work, 8 hours a day on it, but it's like daily sort of reminding yourself what a secure attachment is and rebuilding those neural networks. Now, the other 3 attachment styles that you see here in red, those are all referred to as insecure attachment. So we have anxious, dismissive, and disorganized. Let's talk about these really quickly. And I'm simplifying this to a great degree. There's so much more about attachment that we could go into. This will give us a head start. This will give us a decent understanding. So secure attachment style, as you see here, they tend to have a positive view of self and a positive view of the other. An anxious attachment style tends to have a negative view of self and a positive view of others. So people with anxious attachment often require their partner or their therapist or their child to soothe them. They feel like they don't have the ability to soothe themselves, especially after something was upsetting. It's very difficult for people with anxious attachment to build themselves back up in an internal way. Now, dismissive attachment is sort of the polar opposite of anxious attachment. And that is they have a positive sense of self, but a negative sense of others. So they tend to be very self-reliant, lonerism. They can take care of business. They can make money. They can pay the bills, that sort of thing. But when it comes to emotional connection or intimacy, they often turn the cold shoulder. They don't fully trust the other. It could be their child, it could be their partner. But when things get emotional, when things get emotionally intimate or emotionally vulnerable, that's the moment that the dismissive attachment style tends to pull away. And then you have the disorganized attachment, which is really a combo of anxious and dismissive. As you see here, it's negative view of self and a negative view of other. If you've ever known anybody with borderline personality disorder, or if you've had borderline personality disorder, the odds are very good that they have a disorganized attachment style. Disorganized would indicate pretty clearly that you would have had a lot of chaos, a lot of trauma potentially in your life. So what are the 5 core attachment needs? Well, let's read through them really quickly now. We need, especially from that 0 to 2 years of age, we need secure attachment to others. And that's going to basically be some combo and some consistency around these 4 qualities: safety, nurture, acceptance, and stability. We need our parents or our primary caregivers to basically model safety, nurture, acceptance, and stability routinely in our life. Now, it's not like they have to do that perfectly all the time. People can make mistakes or not be able to provide those at times, but it means the preponderance of our interactions with our primary caregivers are based on safety, nurture, acceptance, and stability. But that's not all. We also need autonomy, competence, and a sense of identity. Now that develops a little bit later. That's a different map. the core conflict relational theme map, it is called. Eventually, we need to develop a sense of we get to explore this world on our own. We get to develop competence without somebody coming in and doing it for us. And basically, we are separate from our primary caregivers. We can explore the world as independent, autonomous agents to the degree that we are safely attached. Obviously, we cannot be completely autonomous. We also need, as one of our 5 core attachment needs, freedom to express valid needs and valid emotions. So if a child expresses anger or frustration or fear, then that is valid, right? The child is naturally reading the world and interpreting it through their emotions and expressing them. And a parent that shuts that sort of thing down, then that is actually creating a wounded inner child where the child doesn't feel that they can express their true, authentic self. And the child eventually learns that certain emotions are danger emotions and should be quarantined off or hidden as like prisoners within their own psyche, sort of hidden away. We also need spontaneity and play. And ideally, the caregivers are also engaging in that spontaneity and play with us. It's a free-flowing interaction of spontaneity and play. And lastly, realistic limits and self-control. We have to learn the ability to develop self-control and not have control be sort of given to us or forced into us. When we have parents who do that, parents are a little too helicoptery. We don't learn the critical abilities to learn to regulate ourselves because the parent's trying to come in and sort of do it for us. Okay, so what are these wounds, this neglect, and this trauma? What does it do internally to our psyche, and how does it create this wounded child effect? Well, let's read this here. Wounds, traumas, emotional neglect cause the child to hide away or shame, or in other words, other various parts of themselves. When we're taught to shame or put certain parts of our authentic nature into a box because they're not allowed by our parents, our primary caregivers, our society, whatever it may be, that effectively becomes a quarantined off or a sectioned off part of yourself. Now I'm using the parts language here, which really comes from internal family systems, which I'm a huge advocate for. In fact, if you're interested in parts healing, if you recognize that you have some wounded inner child, sort of like childlike behavior that pops out in your adult world, that essentially means that you have some of these parts that need to be brought back into the fold of your true, whole, authentic self. And that's basically what the repair requires, which is to make whole again. In fact, the word healing comes from the root word whole. So to make whole is to heal. Then I highly suggest internal family systems, IFS therapy, and you can find an internal family systems therapist in any state in the United States. And I'm not sure about the world, but I'm sure you can work with people through telemedicine doing the internal family systems therapy. It's very effective and it's very fast in terms of therapy, and it helps deal with the psychic wounding that we may have experienced as children. Now, if you're not sure what your history is like, and many people aren't, especially if you think about age 0 to 2, most people don't have memory, so most people don't know what was really going on at 0 to 2. There are 3 assessments that I suggest to all of my clients to take to give you a better sort of snapshot of like what happened to you in the developing age, where your core wounds might actually lie. To take these 3 assessments, go to the link below and I'll show you the website really quickly. But basically this will give you a clearer picture of the areas that particularly were damaging to you as a child, if indeed there were. Here's my website here, opensourceowners.com. If you go to 3 questionnaires for mental health self-knowledge, what you will see is that there are these 3 questionnaires that I'm a big fan of. They just help us understand our own internal experience a little bit better. Often these are big aha moments for people. So the ACE questionnaire, you may have heard of that, the childhood emotional neglect questionnaire, which is critical, and then the resiliency questionnaire, and they are just on the website here, so you can just take them from the website. Here is the link, just in case you want that or need that. Okay, so as a result of these psychic injuries, as we grow, the inner child parts who experienced that wounding, the emotional neglect or the trauma or the abuse, those inner child parts do not grow. They remain stuck. So if you go and eventually start talking to these inner parts through internal family systems therapy or some other type of deep self-work, if you ask them how old they think you are, usually they will answer at a much younger age. They'll say, well, I think you're 7, or I think you're 4, or I think you're 6, or something like that. And that's because that part is still that age. So it's kind of weird in the psyche of humans in the sense that There can be parts of you that are still children and never developed, even though you're a 50-year-old man or woman or something like that. So the reclamation is eventually getting to talk and dialogue with those parts in an empathetic way, and then inviting them back into the full adult consciousness that we are sort of living now. And once we are stuck, once we have these psychic injuries, these inner childs who are stuck, we then form what are called schemas or personas. Basically, the version of ourselves that we present to the people that we know and the environments that we work in. And these are really around compensation for these unresolved wounds. Now, here's another link. If you go to the Attachment Project, and you look up early maladaptive schemas, you will find the 16 core schemas. These are interesting. Okay, so here we have the 18 maladaptive schemas. I think I said 16. We have domain, so that's the main thing to understand. There's domain 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? And these are based on the primal wounds that we have. And you can read through these later. This is a really fascinating article. They go through each of them in a lot more detail. Like if you're curious about the abandonment schema, you can read a little bit about that, or the mistrust abuse schema. You can read about that. Very useful information to understand. Not totally necessary, but if you want a little bit more information, go for it. It is a result of these psychic injuries and this sort of inner child wounding that we also form our core limiting beliefs. And there's going to be some examples of core limiting beliefs in just a second. But first, let's do some examples of the schemas and the personas. One of them is the overachiever. The overachiever feels seen, heard, and valued through success and achievement, and they use external validation to cope with low self-worth. So this is an example of the type of person that we can sort of externally project onto the world that's really just sort of like compensating or maybe overcompensating for the wounding that we originally had, the messaging that we originally had way back, when we were 2, but also to age 6 or 7. That's the critical area of development in the human psyche. We have the caretaker. These tend to be codependent relationships. They gain their sense of self-worth and identity through neglecting their own needs. Love for them equals catering to others and ignoring themselves. We have the underachiever. Fear of criticism or shame leads to making themselves small, little, quiet, and inconsequential. Taking themselves out of the emotional game before it is even played is their strategy. And love for them equals sort of being invisible. We have the rescuer or the protector. Active attempts to rescue those around them to make up for childhood vulnerabilities. Seeing others as needing help and puts themselves in a position of power to help. Love for them equals helping others solve their problems. Guess which one a lot of therapists have? The life of the party. Love for them equals everyone around them is happy. The childhood message was it's not okay to feel negative emotions or much emotional range other than happy or up. The yes person, again, codependent relationships, very common with this, drops everything to help others. Self-sacrifice and being a good person as modeled in their youth as to how love is supposed to be. And the last one, the hero worshiper, needs a person or a guru to follow. As a child, they often looked up to a superhero with, quote, no faults. Love then equaled deny self-needs and desires plus modeling their life after their own hero/guru. So these are just some examples of how our personas and our schemas can sort of be projected as what we think of as our core personality, but really it's a sort of defense mechanism or a projection to help sort of defend against these deep inner child wounds, these deep memories of neglect or abuse. Okay, so let's look at some examples of core limiting beliefs. Again, these get formed really early as a result of what our childlike self perceived from our primary caregivers and other traumas and forms of neglect that we experience in our developing years. But they become core limiting beliefs because we believe them at the core. If your core limiting belief, for example, is I am unlovable, your therapist, your partner, your child, whomever might earnestly decree to you that you are indeed lovable and they love you so much, and they will say everything they can to sort of like prove to you that you are lovable. But a deep core limiting belief will have the feeling internally of like, okay, yeah, you're saying that, but I know better. I know that foundationally I'm unlovable. It's this deep felt sense that this core limiting belief is true no matter what anybody else says or what other life experiences we can have. So the examples that I wrote down for core limiting beliefs are these, and of course there can be others that you have, but these are pretty common. So I am unlovable, I am not good enough, I am not important, mistakes are failures and are bad. If I make a mistake, I will be rejected. What makes me good enough is having other people think good of me. I am not smart, I am too much, I am too little, etc. Now, if you struggle with these core limiting beliefs or insecure attachment styles, you might be interested in a little bit of mentorship. Core limiting beliefs, healing the inner child, and core attachment wounds are what we talk about all the time in this mentorship program. So if you're interested, go ahead and again, click that link below to check that out. Here are my gifts to you just for watching the video all the way to the end. If you haven't gotten your free ebooks, go ahead and click the link below, the other link below, to get these ebooks sent to your email right away. And I hope that you enjoy them. And that was Healing the Inner Child Through Attachment Wounds, Trauma, and Neglect, Part 1. Part 1 was really about like, where did these wounds come from and what do they result in? And so where they come from is that early childhood attachment sort of wounding, shaming, guilting, segregating parts of our authentic nature into the realm of subconscious, into the realm of not allowed, right? And those inner children, those versions of ourselves that we've locked away or stultified, is that the right word? Stultified? I think that's the right word. And how those parts of us, those inner children, ultimately need to be brought back into the wholeness that is our true authentic nature. Even as an adult, we can still do this work, and it's really critical to our continued personal development, our continued mental health. This is on nobody but you. Nobody can do this work but you. If you find this type of thing to be potentially valuable, then watch Part 2, where we talk about how to actually do the reparenting work. How do you actually build a secure attachment model? How do you heal this inner child? I've suggested in this video getting an internal family systems therapist, and that's definitely one way to do it. But perhaps you just want to sort of work on this on your own. It's totally possible to reclaim this sort of space and to do that healing sort of work on your own. Again, maybe with a little bit of mentorship, but you don't necessarily need to go deep diving into therapy after therapy, but you do need critical information. You do need to sort of know how to do the positive affirmations and the rewiring of the neural networks, and ultimately how to build a secure attachment model in your brain, which once it's built, it will work better for the rest of your life because that model just simply works better. It tracks to reality more profoundly and better than the map that we have built in the insecure domains of the anxious, dismissing, or disorganized attachment style. So the secure map will just work better. Now, how do you build it? How do you get it to be part of your neural anatomy and your neural networks? That's what Part 2 is all about. So I hope to see you then. Until then, thanks for watching the video and take care of yourselves out there. Bye-bye.